The crunch of alien soil beneath Commander Diana Reeves' boots echoed through the crystalline forest of Nexus 7. Towering formations of translucent minerals cast prismatic shadows across her combat armor as she led her small reconnaissance team through the hostile terrain. The mission was simple: gather intelligence on Krethak movement in the sector. But in war, nothing ever stayed simple. Lieutenant James Walsh signaled from her left, his motion tracker displaying multiple signatures approaching their position. Diana raised her fist, bringing the squad to an immediate halt. Through the rainbow-tinted haze, she could make out the distinctive silhouettes of Krethak warriors, their chitinous armor reflecting the crystalline light in mesmerizing patterns. "Hold position," she whispered through the tactical comm. "Let them pass." But fate had other plans. A sudden tremor shook the ground, causing several crystal formations to shatter. The noise drew immediate attention from the Krethak patrol. Their leader, a massive figure Diana would later know as Warlord Vexthor, turned toward their position with unsettling grace. The firefight erupted in seconds. Plasma bolts melted crystal formations, while human railgun rounds sparked off Krethak armor. Diana's team fought with practiced precision, but they were outnumbered 3-1. Walsh went down first, a plasma bolt catching him in the shoulder. Then Specialist Rodriguez, her scream cut short by a Krethak blade. "Fall back," Diana ordered, providing covering fire as her remaining team members retreated. She could hear the clicking mandibles of the Krethak warriors, a sound that would haunt her dreams. A plasma bolt grazed her leg, sending her stumbling behind a large crystal formation. The heat had melted through her armor, searing the flesh beneath. Warlord Vexthor's voice boomed across the battlefield, the universal translator rendering his clicks and chitters into chilling English. "Surround them. Let none escape." Diana checked her weapon. 2 magazines left. Her tactical display showed 3 teammates still moving, but they were being herded into a killing zone. She had to act fast. "Hernandez, Parker, Morrison, on my mark. Throw everything you've got at their left flank. Make it count." She pulled a plasma grenade from her belt, one of the few they'd managed to reverse engineer from Krethak technology. The explosion lit up the crystalline forest like a miniature sun, fragments of crystal and alien armor raining down in a deadly shower. Diana used the chaos to move, ignoring the searing pain in her leg as she tried to reach her scattered team. But the Krethak were faster. Vexthor himself appeared through the settling debris, his massive form towering over her. One swipe of his arm sent her weapon flying, another knocked her to the ground. The impact drove the air from her lungs, and she felt something crack in her chest. The Krethak warriors gathered around, their mandibles clicking in what Diana recognized as their version of laughter. Vexthor crouched beside her, his compound eyes reflecting her battered form. "So this is humanity's finest," he mocked, running a clawed hand along her damaged armor. "We expected more from a species that's caused us so much trouble." The other warriors joined in the laughter, some mimicking her fall with exaggerated gestures. Diana's vision blurred from pain and rage, but she forced herself to memorize every detail. The patterns on their armor, the way they moved, their weaknesses. "Leave her," Vexthor commanded, standing to his full height. "Let her serve as a message to others who would resist us. The Krethak cannot be defeated." They moved away, their laughter fading into the crystal forest. Diana lay there, blood seeping into the alien soil, but her mind was already working. They'd made a crucial mistake, one that would cost them dearly. They'd left her alive. Through the pain and humiliation, a plan began to form. She wasn't just a soldier anymore. She was a survivor, and survivors, she knew, were the most dangerous warriors of all. As consciousness faded, Diana made herself a promise. The next time the Krethak heard laughter, it wouldn't be their own. Night fell on Nexus 7, bringing with it a haunting display of bioluminescent crystals that bathed the battlefield in ethereal light. Commander Diana Reeves dragged herself through the undergrowth, each movement sending waves of agony through her injured body. The Krethak's laughter still echoed in her mind, fueling a fire that burned hotter than her wounds. She found shelter in the hollow of a massive crystal formation, its translucent walls providing some protection from thermal scanning. As she tended to her injuries with what remained of her medkit, Diana's tactical training took over. The Krethak had made their first mistake by leaving her alive. Their second was assuming she'd die alone in the wilderness. Through the crystal walls, she could see the distant glow of the Krethak camp. Their overconfidence was evident in their minimal security. No rotating patrols, no sensor arrays, just the occasional guard making lazy rounds. Diana allowed herself a grim smile. Pride before the fall. Using her damage tablet, she began documenting everything she observed about the aliens. Their armor, while impressive, had weak points at the joints. Their vision, though superior in daylight, seemed to rely heavily on movement and heat signatures. Most importantly, they were creatures of habit, following the same patterns with mechanical precision. A distant explosion drew her attention. Through the crystal's distorted surface, she saw emergency flares lighting up the night sky. Her team, or what remained of it, was still out there, still fighting. Diana keyed her emergency beacon, sending out a coded burst transmission. Short enough to avoid detection, but powerful enough to reach any human forces in the area. The night grew colder, and Diana's injuries reminded her of their severity. Her leg wound had stopped bleeding, but infection was a real concern. The cracked ribs made every breath a challenge. But physical pain was nothing compared to the memory of Warlord Vexthor's mockery. She thought of Walsh, of Rodriguez, of all those who'd fallen. Their faces drove her forward as she began to plan. The Krethak had sophisticated weapons, but they relied too heavily on their technology. Diana had been trained differently, taught to survive with nothing but wit and will. Using her combat knife, she began fashioning primitive weapons from the crystal fragments littering the ground. The alien minerals were surprisingly sharp, capable of penetrating the gaps in Krethak armor if applied with enough force. She worked through the night, ignoring the pain, focusing on the task ahead. Dawn brought new sounds. Search parties. The Krethak were finally taking her seriously. Diana heard Vexthor's distinctive voice commanding his troops, his tone no longer amused but frustrated. Good. Let them waste resources looking in the wrong places. She used their distraction to her advantage, carefully making her way closer to their camp. Each movement was calculated, each pause timed to the rhythm of their patrols. The crystal forest worked in her favor, its natural formations creating false heat signatures that confused Krethak scanners. From her new vantage point, Diana observed their supply lines, their communication patterns, their weaknesses. She noticed how the younger warriors deferred to the veterans, how their hierarchy influenced their tactical decisions. Every detail was a potential advantage. A Krethak scout passed barely meters from her position. Diana remained perfectly still, controlling her breathing despite the protest of her broken ribs. The alien warrior's mandibles clicked in frustration as it surveyed the area. These weren't the actions of a superior species, they were the movements of an enemy beginning to feel fear. As the scout moved on, Diana retrieved a small datapad from her damaged armor. It contained encrypted files on Krethak physiology, information that had cost many human lives to obtain. Their exoskeletons, while tough, had nerve clusters that could be exploited. Their respiratory system was efficient but vulnerable to certain toxins found in the local flora. She spent the day gathering these plants, carefully extracting their poison using techniques learned from survival training. The work was slow, painful, but each small victory added to her arsenal. Diana wasn't just preparing for survival anymore. She was preparing for war. Evening brought new challenges as Krethak patrols intensified. They'd found signs of her movement, evidence that their prey wasn't as helpless as they'd assumed. Diana watched from hiding as Vexthor personally inspected her false trail, his massive form tense with barely contained rage. "Find her," he roared, the translator making his voice sound even more menacing. "She's making us look like fools." Diana allowed herself a small smile. They were right to be worried. She'd spent the day watching their routines, marking their vulnerabilities. Tonight, she would remind them why humanity had survived countless wars, why Earth still stood despite all odds. The sun set on Nexus 7, and Diana made her final preparations. Her wounds still burned, but the pain had become a tool, sharpening her focus. She checked her makeshift weapons one last time. Crystal shards dipped in toxic plant extract, improvised traps set with salvaged equipment, and most importantly, the element of surprise. Tomorrow, the hunt would begin in earnest, but this time, Diana wouldn't be the prey. The Krethak had wanted to make an example of her, to show the galaxy humanity's weakness. Instead, they were about to learn a costly lesson about human resilience. As darkness fell, Commander Diana Reeves emerged from her hiding place, a shadow among shadows. The time for hiding was over. Now it was time to show the Krethak why you should never leave a wounded human alive, especially one with nothing left to lose. The first Krethak warrior fell silently, never knowing what hit them. Diana's crystal blade found the gap between armor plates, the toxic coating doing its work quickly and quietly. She dragged the body into the underbrush, already moving to her next position. The hunt had begun. The pre-dawn hours cast strange shadows through the crystal forest, creating perfect cover for her operations. Diana had spent days studying their patterns, and now she put that knowledge to use. The Krethak's predictability would be their undoing. From her vantage point, she watched two more warriors approach her first trap. They moved with the arrogance of apex predators, unaware they'd become prey. The ground beneath them gave way, crystal spikes laced with toxin emerging from the pit she'd carefully prepared. One fell immediately. The other managed a strangled cry before succumbing. The camp erupted into activity. Diana smiled grimly as she observed the chaos through a cracked piece of crystal. Warlord Vexthor emerged from his command tent, mandibles clicking furiously as he barked orders. The warriors scrambled to form search parties, but their movements were panicked, uncoordinated. Diana triggered her second trap, a series of salvaged plasma charges set to create a devastating chain reaction. The explosion sent crystalline shrapnel flying through the Krethak ranks. Their superior technology meant nothing against simple physics and well-placed explosives. Find her. Vexthor's roar echoed through the forest. She's just one human. But Diana was already moving, using the confusion to infiltrate deeper into their territory. She'd memorized the layout of their camp, knew exactly where they kept their supplies, their weapons, their communications equipment. Each target was marked for destruction. A young warrior stumbled into her path, probably separated from its squad in the chaos. Diana struck without hesitation, her makeshift blade finding the nerve cluster at the base of its neck. As the body fell, she retrieved its weapon, her first real piece of Krethak technology. The alien rifle felt awkward in her hands, but she'd studied their weapons during her observation. The power cell could be overloaded, creating a makeshift bomb. She set to work immediately, fingers moving with practiced precision, despite her still healing injuries. More explosions rocked the camp as her earlier traps continued to take their toll. The Krethak's superior night vision worked against them now, the bright flashes leaving them disoriented and vulnerable. Diana used their confusion to strike again and again, never staying in one place long enough to be caught. A squad of warriors passed beneath her position in the crystal canopy. She counted 6 of them, moving in tight formation. Their discipline was improving. They were learning. Diana waited until they were directly below her before dropping the overloaded rifle. The explosion scattered the squad, their formation breaking as they sought cover. Diana picked them off one by one, using their own tactics against them. Each fallen warrior provided more resources, more weapons to turn against their former owners. Through it all, she could hear Vexthor coordinating the defense of his camp. The warlord's voice had lost its mocking tone, replaced by something closer to concern. He'd realized too late that he wasn't dealing with just any human soldier. Diana paused to check her wounds. The adrenaline had kept the pain at bay, but she could feel her strength beginning to wane. She needed to end this soon, before exhaustion took its toll. But first, she had one more target in mind. The Krethak's communication array stood at the center of their camp, a vital link to their fleet in orbit. Diana had saved it for last, knowing its destruction would throw their entire operation into disarray. She approached carefully, using the growing panic in the camp as cover. 3 guards protected the array, their weapons trained on the surrounding darkness. Diana noticed their stance, the way they jumped at shadows. Fear had taken root in the Krethak ranks, an emotion they weren't used to feeling. She launched her attack with surgical precision. The first guard fell to a poisoned crystal shard in the throat. The second turned, only to meet Diana's stolen blade. The third managed to fire, plasma bolts illuminating the night, but Diana was already moving. She rolled under its guard, coming up inside its reach. Her blade found the weak point in its armor, and the guard collapsed. Working quickly, Diana planted her remaining explosives around the base of the communication array. She just armed the last charge when a familiar voice froze her in place. Impressive, human. Warlord Vexthor stepped from the shadows, his massive form blocking her escape route. You've proven more resourceful than we expected. Diana straightened, ignoring the protest of her injuries. You should have killed me when you had the chance. The warlord's mandibles clicked in what might have been appreciation. Perhaps. But then we wouldn't have learned this valuable lesson about your species. He raised his weapon. A mistake I won't repeat. Diana's hand tightened on the detonator in her palm. The charges were set. One press and the entire array would go up in flames. But Vexthor stood between her and safety, and she was running out of options. The standoff stretched for a moment that felt like eternity. Then, in the distance, a new sound cut through the night. The distinctive roar of human dropships entering the atmosphere. Diana's emergency beacon had worked after all. Vexthor's compound eyes turned skyward, and in that moment of distraction, Diana made her move. The detonator clicked, and the world erupted in fire and crystal shards. The last thing she saw before diving for cover was the look of surprise on the warlord's alien face. The hunt wasn't over, but the tables had turned. Help was coming, and the Krethak were about to learn why humans were the most dangerous species in the galaxy, especially when they worked together. The dropships descended through Nexus 7's atmosphere like avenging angels, their engines burning bright against the crystal-studded sky. Diana pressed herself against the remains of the communications array, her breath coming in short gasps. The explosion had bought her precious seconds, but Warlord Vexthor was already recovering, his massive form emerging from the debris. Through the chaos, a familiar voice crackled over her damaged comm unit. Commander Reeves, this is Captain Russell Fletcher. Hold position, we're coming in hot. Diana almost laughed. Fletcher had been her rival at the academy, always trying to outdo her scores. Now his voice was the sweetest sound she'd ever heard. Make it quick, Fletcher. The party's getting interesting down here. The first dropship touched down at the edge of the clearing, its doors blasting open to reveal a squad of heavily armed humans. Leading them was Technical Sergeant Olivia Fan, her distinctive red armor marked with kill counts from previous engagements. The sight of human reinforcements sent the Krethak into disarray. Spread out. Vexthor roared, rallying his troops. Don't let them regroup. Diana used the confusion to make her move, sprinting toward the human lines. Plasma bolts sizzled past her head, but years of combat training took over. She rolled, came up running, and felt strong hands pull her behind cover. You look like hell, Commander, Fan said, already returning fire at the advancing Krethak. Though you should see the other guys. Status report, Diana demanded, accepting a fresh weapon and medical injection from one of Fan's medics. The stimulant coursed through her veins, dulling the pain and sharpening her focus. We picked up your beacon 2 days ago, Fletcher explained, joining them behind the makeshift barricade. Took some time to gather enough forces for a rescue op. Looks like you kept yourself busy, though. Diana checked her new weapons charge. The Krethak needed a lesson in humility. Now let's make sure it sticks. More dropships were landing, disgorging squads of human soldiers. The Krethak responded with savage intensity, their superior numbers still giving them an advantage. But they were fighting differently now. Gone was the casual arrogance that had marked their earlier battles. They'd learned to fear human determination. They got reinforcements coming, Fan reported, checking her tactical display. 3 heavy carriers just dropped out of FTL. Diana's mind raced, analyzing options. The Krethak would expect them to fall back, to cut their losses and retreat. That's what any rational species would do. But humans had never been entirely rational. "Fletcher," she called, "remember that stunt you pulled during the Mars campaigns? The one that got you suspended?" A slow grin spread across the captain's face. "The hammer and anvil. Command said it was too risky." "Command isn't here." Diana turned to Fan. "Can your teams lay down enough suppressing fire to keep them pinned for 3 minutes?" The technical surgeon checked her ammunition. "Give us 2 minutes of plasma coverage from the dropships, and we'll give you 5. Diana nodded, her plan taking shape. "Fletcher, take your best pilots. When I give the signal, I want you to recreate Mars, but bigger. The crystal formations will amplify the effect." Understanding dawned in Fletcher's eyes. "You're crazy, Reeves. I like it." The next few minutes were a symphony of coordinated chaos. Fan's ground teams laid down devastating fire, forcing the Krethak to seek cover among the crystal formations. The dropships maintained a steady barrage, their plasma cannons superheating the air. Diana moved through the human lines, coordinating the attack. Each soldier she passed straightened a little, fought a little harder. They'd all heard by now how she'd survived alone, how she brought the mighty Krethak low. Her legend was already growing. Vexthor seemed to sense something was wrong. His commands became more urgent, trying to push his forces forward before the humans could spring whatever trap they planned. But it was too late. Now, Diana's command crackled across all frequencies. Fletcher's dropships rose as one, their engines screaming as they executed a maneuver that violated several laws of physics and common sense. They dove toward the crystal forest, their combined engine wash creating a superheated vortex. The crystalline formations, already stressed from battle damage, began to resonate. The effect was devastating. Crystal spires shattered in cascading waves, their fragments becoming lethal projectiles. The Krethak's advanced armor, designed to deflect energy weapons, provided little protection against the crystal shrapnel. Forward, Diana charged from cover, leading the human counterattack. Soldiers fell in behind her, their war cries drowning out the sound of breaking crystal. They hit the Krethak lines like a thunderbolt, exploiting gaps opened by Fletcher's aerial assault. Through the chaos, Diana caught sight of Vexthor. The warlord was rallying his troops, trying to maintain order in the face of an attack his species had never encountered before. Their eyes met across the battlefield, and Diana saw something new in his compound gaze, respect mixed with fear. The battle raged on, but its outcome was no longer in doubt. The Krethak's rigid tactics crumbled in the face of human adaptability. Their technological superiority meant nothing against the combined might of human ingenuity and determination. As the sun began to set on Nexus 7, casting rainbow refractions through the ruined crystal forest, Diana allowed herself a moment of grim satisfaction. The Krethak had wanted to teach humanity its place in the galaxy. Instead, they'd learned a lesson of their own. Never underestimate a wounded human, and never, ever mock what you don't understand. Dawn broke over the battlefield, its light fracturing through the remaining crystal formations to paint the sky in 1,000 colors. Commander Diana Reeves stood at the forward command post, watching as human forces consolidated their positions. The night's victory had been decisive, but the war wasn't over. Not while Warlord Vexthor still drew breath. Multiple contacts dropping out of FTL, Technical Surgeon Fan reported, her eyes fixed on the tactical display. Krithak reinforcements, just as expected. Diana nodded, her expression grim. The Krithak wouldn't accept defeat easily. Their pride wouldn't allow it. Status of our forces. Fletcher's squadrons are rearmed and ready. Fan answered. Ground teams report 70% combat effectiveness. We've adapted some of the salvaged Krithak weapons to our systems. Their energy output is impressive. An explosion lit up the morning sky as the first Krithak drop pods began their descent. Diana watched them fall, remembering the mockery in Vexthor's voice when he'd left her for dead. That seemed like a lifetime ago now. Commander, a young soldier sprinted up to their position. We've intercepted a transmission. Warlord Vexthor is requesting a parley. Diana's eyebrows rose. The Krithak weren't known for diplomacy. Location. The central crystal spire. What's left of it. He's offering safe passage. Fletcher joined them, his armor scarred from the previous battle. It's a trap. Of course it is, Diana agreed, but it's also an opportunity. The Krithak follow a strict warrior code. If we can defeat Vexthor in personal combat, the rest might stand down. Fan finished. It's risky, Commander. You're still not fully healed. Diana checked her weapons, standard issue rifle, plus the crystal blade she crafted during her survival ordeal. Neither is he. Our last encounter left its mark. The walk to the meeting point was tense. Diana had agreed to come alone, but Fletcher had positioned snipers in the surrounding crystal formations. The Krithak had probably done the same. The ground was still hot from the previous night's battle, smoking craters and shattered crystal marking, where the heaviest fighting had occurred. Warlord Vexthor waited at the base of the crystal spire, his massive form casting a long shadow in the morning light. His armor was battle damage, showing signs of the previous night's combat. But it was his stance that interested Diana, slightly favoring his right side, where her explosion had caught him. Commander Reeves, his translator rendered his clicks into English. You've proven yourself a worthy adversary. Skip the pleasantries, Diana replied, keeping her distance. We both know how this ends. Vexthor's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. Yes, one way or another, this battle will be remembered. Your species is fascinating. We thought you primitive, relying on brute force and outdated weapons. We were wrong. Your first mistake, Diana said, was assuming technological superiority equals tactical superiority. Your second was leaving me alive to prove it. No. Vexthor's compound eyes fixed on her. Our mistake was underestimating humanity's greatest weapon, your impossible refusal to accept defeat. He drew his plasma sword, the weapon humming to life. Shall we correct that error? Diana raised her rifle, but Vexthor moved with surprising speed. His blade sliced through the weapon, leaving her holding two useless pieces. She dropped them, drawing her crystal knife in one smooth motion. The duel that followed would be talked about for generations. The massive Krithak warlord against the human commander, alien technology versus improvised weaponry. Vexthor's strikes were powerful enough to shatter crystal, but Diana was faster, using her smaller size to stay inside his reach. Her blade found gaps in his armor, scoring hits that leaked violet blood. His sword caught her shoulder, searing through the armor to burn flesh. They broke apart, circled, clashed again. Neither willing to yield, both fighting for more than just personal victory. You could have retreated, Vexthor said during one pause, both combatants breathing heavily. Called for evacuation when you were wounded. Why stay and fight? Diana wiped blood from a cut above her eye. Because some things are worth fighting for. Pride. Honor. Teaching arrogant aliens a lesson in humility. She saw the strike coming but couldn't quite dodge it. Vexthor's blade caught her side, sending her sprawling. The pain was incredible, but Diana rolled with it, coming up in a defensive stance. The warlord pressed his advantage, his next strike aimed at her head. But Diana had been waiting for this. She'd studied his fighting style, noted how he overextended on powerful strikes. As his blade swept down, she stepped inside his guard. Her crystal knife, honed on the same battlefield where they now fought, found the gap between his armor plates. Vexthor staggered, violet blood flowing freely now. His sword dropped from nerveless fingers as Diana twisted the blade. Their eyes met, and she saw in his compound gaze not hatred, but understanding. "Well fought," he managed before collapsing. The battlefield fell silent. Above, Krethak ships hung motionless in the sky. Diana retrieved Vexthor's sword, holding it high where both sides could see. For a moment, the outcome balanced on a knife's edge. Then, one by one, the Krethak warriors ground their weapons. Their ships began pulling back, ascending into orbit. Not in retreat, but in respect. They had witnessed something unprecedented, a human defeating their greatest warrior in single combat. Fletcher's voice crackled over the comm. "Commander, orders." Diana watched the Krethak withdrawing, remembering the mockery, the pain, the long nights of planning her revenge. But revenge wasn't what she felt now. Instead, there was a quiet satisfaction, not just in victory, but in knowing that humanity had proven itself worthy of respect. "Stand down," she ordered. "Let them go. They've learned their lesson." As the sun climbed higher over Nexus 7, painting the battlefield in prismatic light, Diana Reeves smiled. The Krethak had come expecting to find an inferior species, easy prey for their superior technology and tactics. Instead, they'd discovered humanity's greatest strength, the ability to rise from defeat, to adapt, to overcome. They'd wanted to teach humanity its place in the galaxy. Instead, they'd learned that humanity's place was anywhere they chose to make it. And that was a lesson the Krethak would never forget.